today are Fletcher Harper, who is the Executive Director of Greenfaith US, and is going to be speaking in part about the Sacred People, Sacred Earth, which is a Sounding the Alarm initiative and has come up with some beautiful language that I hadn't personally read before. Very powerful statement that was made in the last few weeks, and he's going to speak in part about that, but also guide our conversation today. Philippa Roland is the president of the Multifaith Association of South Australia. Part of what they do is the Living the Change initiative and look at personal behavior change, which is going to be very interesting for many in attendance. Steve Chu is the representative of Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation. They have been exploring green COVID response and recovery options and also look at intergenerational resilience. I'll be able to tell you more about that. Reverend Barry Bear is also with us. Reverend Bear is an interfaith, interspiritual minister, a faith leader liaison for the South African Faith Communities Environment Institute. Within this, they are carrying out an advocacy push against industrialized livestock. Finally, Becky O'Brien is with us, the director of Food and Climate at Hazon, which is the Jewish lab for sustainability based in the United States. So we have a variety of perspectives and experience. I'm going to play this video for you, and then Fletcher, I invite you to take over as our facilitator today.
We are united by a fundamental belief that all people,
all living things,
alles Leben, all living things,
and the earth are sacred. As we consider the state of the world today, our hearts overflow with concern.
Tenemos temor y estamos frustrados por el daño que el COVID-19 está infligiendo en nuestras comunidades.
The pandemic has revealed
cruel injustices.
The vulnerable suffer the most severe impacts.
We know about this injustice. We have seen it before.
We have seen it before.
These same communities are disproportionately and catastrophically affected
by the accelerating climate emergency.
Vemos las grandes amenazas que están a nuestra puerta.
We see the rise of increasingly unaccountable or authoritarian governments,
exploitative economies, and extremist cultural forces which pit us against each other,
target women and oppressed communities,
and foster doubt about the science required to save life on Earth.
This is a world of widespread poverty,
racial and gender injustice, massive income inequality, and the devastation of nature.
This version of civilization is unsustainable at every level.
A far better future is possible.
Un futuro mucho mejor
es posible si nuestra respuesta colectiva a la pandemia
y a la crisis climática está guiada por la compasión, el amor y la justicia.
At a scale that meets this moment.
We must not only provide the relief that so many need to survive, we must create a new culture, politics, and economy of life that heals people and planet.
Visualizamos un mundo transformado
in which humanity in all its diversity has developed a shared reverence for life on Earth.
Together we are building resilient, caring communities
and economies that meet everyone's needs and protect the planet. The era of conquest, extraction, and exploitation is given way to cooperation and community.
The good life is one of connectedness with each other and all of nature.
It is a world of flourishing life that replaces despair with joy,
scarcity with shared abundance,
and privilege with justly distributed power.
The work to create this future,
este trabajo comienza ahora.
Begins now.
En los próximos meses, los gobiernos y las instituciones financieras gastarán sumas masivas en respuesta a la pandemia. Governments will present climate commitments at COP26 in November 2021.
These actions must not perpetuate an outdated economic system
that relies on fossil fuels and the destruction of the very forests, waters, oceans, and soils that make life possible.
Instead, they should accelerate renewable energy development,
ensure universal access to clean water and air, affordable clean energy,
and food grown with respect for the land,
create jobs, paying families sustaining wages to workers in safe conditions.
Deben garantizar la protección de los derechos de las comunidades indígenas y los y las defensoras del medio ambiente,
de cuya seguridad dependen los ecosistemas saludables.
Wealthy countries must take responsibility for a larger share of emission reductions to support a global just transition.
We must also prepare ourselves to welcome those who will be displaced by COVID and climate change.
Compassion, love, and justice require no less from us.
La compasión, el amor y la justicia no exigen menos de todas y todos nosotros.
Well, welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. My name's Fletcher Harper. I'm the executive director of Greenfaith, which is an Interfaith International climate and environmental organization. And I'm so happy to be here with wonderful colleagues from faith and religious and spiritual communities around the planet to talk about an issue that collectively we care about deeply, and that religious and spiritual communities are engaging more and more and more. Right at the outset, I want to say that for those of you who have not heard religious or spiritual communities or people talking about these issues before, we're really excited to share with you a little bit about what and how we think. And we hope that you'll be very forthright and direct in your questions to us later in the session, because we all are lifers in the religious and spiritual community. And we know that we're not perfect and have an enormous amount to learn from all of you. As you saw from the video, very recently, and the video is really brand new, very recently, a group of religious and spiritual institutions, leaders who've done multi-faith climate and environmental work for many years came together and formed the Greenfaith International Network. And as part of the launch of that network, these partners together from Africa, Asia, South America, North America, Europe, Australia, Oceania, together we released a statement called Sacred People, Sacred Earth, that called very powerfully for transformative action in response to the climate crisis. The statement addressed issues such as fossil fuel consumption. A very substantial focus in it was related to food systems. And I think that it's safe to say that as much as any major interfaith statement ever, this statement centered the significance of addressing food systems, the treatment of animals, ending tropical deforestation, the respect for a whole host of issues related to this as we've ever seen. Today on this panel, you're going to have a chance to hear from a range of people who will talk about these issues at several different levels. At the systemic level, how is it that we engage governments, major financial institutions around these issues? At the institutional level, how is it that religious institutions can and must play a leading and important role? And at the individual level, how is it that we as individuals can be transformed by changing our relationship to food, seeing that as a deeply moral and spiritual concern? And without any further ado, I'd like to invite Reverend Barry Bear, who's with our wonderful partners at SAFSE, Southern Africa Faith Communities Environment Institute, which is a remarkable organization based in Cape Town, working across the Southern African region. Reverend Bear, SAFSE has done some really important work on food, and most recently is taking on the Gates Foundation in relationship to the kind of concerning food work that it's doing in the continent. Share with us a little bit about SAFSE's work and about that work that is so recent and important.
Thank you so much, Fletcher. Yes, indeed. What a pleasure to be with you. So what I'd like to tell you, first of all, is that my favorite pre-meal blessing is knowing that all of life comes from life, May we be worthy of the sacrifice. So as a multi-faith organization advocating for eco-justice, SAFC takes guidance always from our diverse faith perspectives. Our faiths teach us how to live with the earth, what is acceptable to eat and what not, and how to treat all of life. Yet our theologies of dominion and commercial practices based on greed and exploitation have undermined the values of compassion and respect implicit in all our beliefs. Looking at industrialized livestock farming, for instance, I think immediately of SAFC's cage-free campaign, urging hospitality and FMCG corporates to source eggs from cage-free suppliers by the year 2025. It doesn't sound like a big ask, but the corporate ship turns very slowly, determinedly slowly. Battery hens suffer enormously during their lives, growing up on wire, suffering horrible injuries and discomfort, prohibited from performing many natural functions. And I'm going to tell you about this campaign before I move on to the Gates campaign, Fletcher, if that's okay with you. The exhaustive stress of the life of a chicken cannot help but affect the quality of their eggs. And those of us who see the interconnectedness everywhere believe that humans are literally consuming the stress of these animals and others in the industrial farming system. And we, as a human collective, have become aware of it. A public petition started by my colleague, Georgina Blumiers, has attracted some 300,000 signatures in the matter of a couple of weeks. I no longer purchase supermarket eggs because if we say something and believe it, we have to act on it or risk being called out as hypocrites. So applying these principles of compassion to industrial livestock farming methods, we see the challenge to our faiths, and then we link industrial farming to care of our planet. And so we start to understand that livestock practices which challenge the teachings of our faiths also challenge the well-being of the earth. Each system affects the other, and no system, of course, is a silo. So it's common knowledge that the livestock sector represents a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. Raising livestock for meat, eggs, and milk generates about 14.5% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. That's the second highest source of emissions and greater than all transportation combined. It also uses about 70% of agricultural land and is one of the leading causes of deforestation, biodiversity loss, and water pollution. So what do our faiths say about potentially apocalyptic practices like these? Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and other faiths all have different practices around provision and consumption of meat as food. And for SAFC, the foundational point is that we are all part of the web of life, and our compassion, as well as our passion for eco-justice, must extend to all of life. We're not having these conversations on any meaningful level. And we probably need to, because they actually make for an unpalatable smorgasbord. It's about the artificial fattening processes, the forced breeding, inhumane living conditions, brutal transportation methods, terrifying slaughterhouses. We're looking at that, and then we're going, well, in Islam, ill treatment of animals before slaughter renders them not halal in spite of the legitimate method of slaughter. Nowhere does the meat-eating Christian condone cruelty. Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism share the principle of ahimsa, non-violence towards all beings, and yet we continue to increase our levels of cruelty in the name of profit, pretending to be motivated by a desire to feed people. So looking at these principles of non-violence, we have to extend that to the earth as well. Soil justice is a big part of our food security and the food security of our livestock, of all the livestock in the food chain. So recently, our co-founder, Kate Davies, compiled an open letter to the Gates Foundation requesting them to reconsider their focus on GMO research and development, as well as their methodologies of corporate-based, large-scale, industrialized crop farming. Food security in Africa is vested in the small-scale farmer, about 70% of whom are women. Industrialized methods therefore rob us not only the soil of its life-giving nutrients, but also rob the women and their families of their livelihoods. This is an institutionalized form of patriarchy and gender-based violence and serves only to make food more unaffordable, inaccessible, and unhealthy for the very vulnerable communities that it claims to want to help. We are currently observing 16 days of activism against violence towards women and children, but we're not recognizing that violence towards people comes from the same place as violence towards animals and violence towards the earth, which is what industrialized farming does. So no matter what food we choose to eat, life does come from life. Awareness of the quality of the life we absorb will lead us to a deeper understanding of the life force that supports our continued existence on Earth. And therefore, we conclude that industrialized, corporate-based, large-scale farming of livestock and of crops is counter to aligned spiritual practice.
Thank you so much, Reverend Baer. And that's just a tour de force in terms of linking the teachings from diverse religious and spiritual traditions with these cruel and unspeakably inhumane practices that are becoming and have become the norm globally. So thank you so much for giving us an example of how religious communities can and do speak out on that level. Steve, I'd like to go to you next for a different kind of presentation. The Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation is a remarkable global leader in disaster relief and operates in a number of places and countries that are all but inaccessible to almost any group on the face of the planet. And the Tzu Chi community does so with a remarkable level of skill. You also have a profound commitment to plant-based diets and have, on an institutional level, integrated that remarkably into the way that the foundation works. Tell us a little bit about Tzu Chi and about that work.
Sure. Thanks, Fletcher. And good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Happy to be with you all for this conversation. Like Fletcher was saying, we're Tzu Chi. We work in humanitarian aid and response in about 100 countries, responding under this guiding principle of compassion in action. So founded on Buddhist teachings and working in interfaith ways, through these countries, we really look to build the resilience of individuals and empower them to not only transform their situations, but transform their lives, to be one that can also go forth and empower others. So as Fletcher was saying, working in places that are more inaccessible doesn't just spring out of nowhere, right? It comes from this idea of planting a seed from one location, empowering that location, and slowly reaching out, almost like tree roots spreading into the soil. So yeah, let me briefly talk a little bit about how we work through our framework of plant-based diets, and also look at our response a little bit to what is happening right now with the pandemic. I think in looking at faith-based traditions and spiritual organizations and the role we play in the transformation of food systems to one that is more just and equitable, I think the more we engage with these sorts of organizations, the more sustainable success we'll see. And that's really because I think largely we know what needs to happen, right? We know that a just transition must occur, but how do we go about doing that? The actions that need to take place, I think, can be a little vague sometimes because it's so community dependent, and a lot of these communities that we're working with have been disempowered for so long, they don't see the possibilities, right? So as faith and people's spirit, we bring the power of belief back into the equation, and we ask them, imagine what our future could be like, and let's work together to really design that and create that together. Right? And so whether that is possible, if that's not possible, then we as a faith-based organization can model that for you. Right? Our own abode, which is our monastic home back in Hualien, Taiwan, is completely vegan, self-sufficient. We run on renewable energy, and we grow our own food to serve thousands of people every day coming in and out. Right? And that's an experience that we model not just because it's in alignment to our own faith tradition, but because we know it's possible, and we want to show people that it's possible. Right. Similarly, I think when we look at the transformation of food systems, we also have to look at the transformation of people. Right. And our belief that plant-based diets is something that is more in alignment with our values and who we are as human beings is something that we can say we believe. But if we don't also create the pathway for others to understand that through their religious beliefs, I think it becomes hard to advocate for that on a personal level. Right. So I think working in partnership with faith-based organizations can be a really strong pathway forward. When it comes to our medical systems, Tsuji works within providing free medical care for all of our communities, whether that is through free health clinics or through building institutionalized hospitals. In those hospitals, we ensure that everything there is plant-based and that it's vegan and that it's sourced renewably and that it's sourced locally. Because I think coming to that idea of modeling and coming to that idea of showing what is feasible, food is so visceral and it's so direct, right? So if we talk about switching diets, the first immediate reaction can be, oh, but look at all this delicious stuff that I have to give up, right? But if we can show that there is this delicious, if not even better alternative that is right in front of you and that it's feasible, I think that creates another opportunity to reconsider. And we do that in our hospitals, we do that within our community service centers, we do that in every space that we serve. I know time is really short and we don't want to be talking heads, so I'll just quickly lift up a couple points that I'd love to explore further as we have this conversation. I think intergenerational wisdom exchange is key. That's something that we work a lot with within our communities, because we see that this lineage of knowledge must persist. If we want to have the next generation be effective advocates, we need to ensure that they know they're not alone in this struggle and that they have the wisdom and knowledge of all those who came before them fighting for this struggle to really be there to support them. And so how do we create those enabling environments? Be happy to share some of that. Looking at also mutual aid and the unlearning of some of our practices that have come before us to really address food insecurity in a way that is sufficient and sustainable, I think is something that Tsuji is also learning a lot in, and I'd be happy to share a little bit more. And finally, I think biggest thing in looking at green COVID and climate response, how do we build crisis resilient food systems? And then most essentially, how do we ensure that our packaging is plastic free, that we are really sustainable in how we address the way that we transport food is something that we're working a lot with as well, and be happy to share as well.
Thanks so much, Steve. And if you listeners, if you didn't get the sense, Tsuji is remarkable in the way that it is able to work and operate within very large systems and institutions and make these commitments and carry through on them. It's really remarkable and admirable, and shares, I think, some good characteristics in common, Becky, with Hazon, which has really taken the Jewish community by storm in terms of its incredible engagement at the level of synagogues across the United States and beyond, Jewish institutions, really to frame engagement around food as an issue of Jewish renewal, and then to give Jewish communities tools and opportunities to get to work. Tell us a little bit about Hazon and the Seal of Sustainability and Britt Hazon, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Fletcher. Thank you to all the co-panelists, and thank you to 50 by 40 for hosting this wonderful event and bringing us all together to have these really important conversations. I'm very happy to be here. So Hazon is a Hebrew word that means vision, and Hazon was founded with the idea that sometimes we have a lot of clarity around what we're against, but we don't have a lot of clarity about what we're for. And Hazon wanted to focus on what we are for and creating a vision of a future that some of the panelists have already alluded to is actually very exciting and doesn't really consist of a lot of compromise, but like an irresistible future that we want to be in. And that's what we're working towards here. And we are an environmental organization working to create a healthier and more just, equitable, sustainable world for all. And it was really clear to us that the connection between food and climate change was significant. And we decided as an organization that it was going to be a focus for us. And the top reasons for that are really grounded both in strategy and how to make effective change, as well as in core Jewish values. There's really 5 reasons. One is we're in an environmental crisis, and Jewish tradition compels us to respond, and we need to respond with urgency and with potency. Project Drawdown, a world-class research organization that reviews, analyzes, and identifies the most viable Global Climate Solutions has identified that reducing food waste and transitioning to plant-rich diets are among the very top actions needed to reverse climate change. So if we want to respond with urgency and potency, we need to be addressing those issues. Also, we've discovered that the contributions of those food choices and our current food system is such that we can't slow down and reverse climate change without changing our food system. Changing how we eat will not be enough on its own to save the planet, but we cannot save the planet without changing how we eat. So it is necessary to be focusing on this. Food, of course, is central to Jewish life and tradition. Jews have been thinking about kashrut, what is fit to eat. Kosher means fit. Is this fit to eat? For nearly 3,000 years. So it comes very naturally to Jewish communities, Jewish institutions, to be thoughtful and take our food choices seriously. Fourth, we know you've stumbled on a good solution when it fixes more than one problem. By reducing food waste and or transitioning to plant-rich diets, you're not only contributing to the reversal of climate change, you're addressing issues of hunger, very importantly, animal welfare, personal health. And finally, reducing food waste and transitioning to plant-rich diets are actions that can be taken immediately. They don't require special knowledge or training and are generally cost neutral or even save money. And when you're working with institutional change, those are things that really matter. So we have two core programs. We do this food and climate work in a lot of different ways, but today I'll just focus on our two core programs. I'm going to share my screen and just give you a brief introduction to both of those. And one is the Hazon Seal of Sustainability. So, ta-da, we're in a global environmental crisis. Jewish tradition compels us to respond. And Brit is, you may be familiar with Jewish males at 8 days after their birth having a bris or a brit. And it's a ceremony where a baby is brought into the Jewish community. And the word means covenant or commitment. And so we don't use the word brit lightly. We are looking for people to make a commitment to change. And we hope that they pick up on the not so subtle overtones that we're going for there with that. And people sign up to make a commitment, and they have 6 commitments that they can make, and those are the ones here. And you'll see that transitioning to plant-rich diet is a top priority for us. And what happens is they make that a commitment, and then they pick 1 to 3 actions to achieve that commitment. So here's a snapshot of our Brit Hazon website. And if you were to commit to transition to a plant-rich diet, you'd pick 1 to 3 of actions that we've provided that you will use to commit to for 6 weeks. One example is 1 meal a day, that you'll commit to 1 meal a day being a plant-based meal. Another would be swap it. You pick 1 item in your diet that's meat, dairy, or eggs, and find a substitution that's plant-based and permanently, at least for those 6 weeks, swap that out. And then there's these 6 options of different actions, and then people commit for 6 weeks, and then we do all these other things to keep them looped into our work, sign up for another round of 6 weeks. And this is based in research that we did that around how much time you need to create behavior change. And we've been getting really exciting responses from people who've said, I was in the store and I was making my decisions, and then I remembered I made this commitment and I made a different choice. And so we're really excited about this program. We have a goal of at least 10,000 participants signing up in the next 2 years, and we hope to shoot well past that. We just launched it this month, so we're super excited about that, and I hope you will check it out and sign up. You do not need to be Jewish to participate in this. The Hazon Seal of Sustainability is in certain ways a Brit Hazon for Jewish institutions. That can be synagogues, Jewish community centers, Hillel, which is a Jewish campus, college campus organization, Jewish day schools, Jewish summer camps. And it's a program, a roadmap to help institutions become more sustainable. And it's a 12-month program. We have energy audits around food choices, education and advocacy, waste management, and energy and water. Organizations form green teams. They pick 2 to 3 projects to work on over the coming year, and then we support them through consultations, networking, some mini grants, webinars, conferences like this, to help them get everything they need, both the inspiration and the resources and tools to make their changes. And we've been working with over 150 Jewish institutions from across 19 states in the United States. And collectively, they've been doing at least 350, if not 450 sustainability projects. And these range from composting programs, getting rid of single-use disposables, encouraging putting in water bottle stations, changing like behavior that's like daily behavior, installing solar panels. And we've been really excited. We've been working with dozens of institutions on transitioning to plant-rich diets, doing vegan Shabbat programs and luncheons, and doing screenings of films like Eating Animals, doing book clubs around the book We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast, and helping connect those dots between their food choices and their Jewish values and putting them into action. So that's the overview, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Becky. Great to hear from you, and thank you for getting up very early in the morning in Colorado, where you're based, to be with us. And from one end of the calendar to another, my good friend and longtime colleague Philippa Roland, who's based in Adelaide in South Australia, is, I think, up in the middle of the night for us, and is active in leadership with the Interfaith Association of South Australia, and also with ARC, the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change. Philippa, tell us about your work with food issues, because ARC does very important direct action, social change, systemic change work, and also has leaned in on the individual behavior change level through our shared Living the Change initiative. Say a little bit about your work.
Yeah, I will. Thank you, Fletcher. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I guess as an Australian, I'm going to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking from the unceded lands of the Peramangangana people of the Adelaide Hills and Plains, and I pay my respects to First Nation elders, past, present, and emerging, of all nations across the world. So I also acknowledge Greenfaith, because I must say I'm delighted and heartened by their leadership in faith-led climate action and the growing international network, which I think brings a lot of heart. And I think we all know we're at a crisis point. And I think at the root of all faiths is a sense that humans were given great gifts, and with those great gifts come great responsibilities. And that's the piece we need to pick up, is that ability to respond to where we're up to and to be guided by our faith and by our ethics to take action. So as Fletcher said, I'm here to talk about one of Greenfaith's flagship initiatives, Living the Change. And that's actually the 3rd year that ARC is running that. And I'm going to see whether I can be as efficient as Becky in bringing up my slides and just giving you a bit of colour and light along with my words. So tell me if you're actually seeing the thing, or just I might need to go to slide share. Alrighty. So that is ARC. This is the Living the Change initiative, and it's got these 3 areas of food, energy, and transport. And it's been valuable because it's got a focus on lifestyle change. The materials have really been developed with quite serious science input and also quite good psychological input from Renee Lertzman. She actually ran a pilot, Grounding in Faith, which was about voluntarily not flying, which were quite deep discussions, and I think are relevant during this time of pandemic because of supply chains and how this whole COVID time has made us think about where does our food come from and what's the journey from here to there to get it on our plates. And there are quite big roles about reducing. There are combinations between energy, food and transport that we need to think about. But Living the Change makes it simple by just getting us to think in those three categories. And I was interested that it came forward really at the same time as the IPCC report on 1.5 degrees. And that was actually the first time that the IPCC tackled lifestyle change. And a friend from ANU came up with a simple digest for that IPCC report, which is every half a degree matters, every year matters, and every choice matters. So that is where Living the Change provides you with a bit of an overview for what is the relative merit in greenhouse gas reduction of our different choices. So we can all change a light bulb, but it's not going to save the planet in an adequate time frame. Whereas looking down the list through to eating a plant-based diet, which you can see halfway down, is significant, as is changing some of our transport habits from cars to bikes, or avoiding transatlantic flights, which is something that COVID has very effectively shown us the implications of, and living car-free. It's also had a big influence on looking at what we can do as volunteers. And from my perspective, working in the Multi-Faith Association, that's actually a really important area, because a lot of people in the multicultural, multi-faith space that have come for refuge to Australia, they're not going to write to the Prime Minister. They're not going to join a blockade against gas or coal, but they're worried about climate and they would like to do something. So Living the Change, I think, gives a really important and powerful kind of on-ramp for taking action in our own lives on climate change and helping to build on from that into looking at what other areas we might become willing to take action on. There's also a big crossover, I believe, with Gandhi, in that there's enough for our need, but not our greed. So we need to look at ahimsa, that non-violence, and look at how our interaction with our food system, with our energy and transport systems, with our society systems, is actually becoming more sustainable for all. So those conscious changes have got a big impact, both for our own lives, but they also cut to the heart of something that is abroad in Australia, which is what I do doesn't matter. I'm so small. It's not me, it's China, it's America, it's somebody else, somewhere else. But collectively, we've made this problem. We're collectively got to become part of the solution. And that's where I see that Living the Change is a really good shift towards a plant-based diet, reducing food waste and taking up healthier planet, healthier habits for the planet. And I think from that perspective, a lot of Australians are completely unaware that we actually rank close to Brazil and other developing countries in terms of our land clearing for livestock production and in producing food for livestock, which is probably quite shocking to many. So I think that there's a lot of hope in taking action, and that also is part of what Christiana Figueres talks about, is we've had learned helplessness about climate change. And to make a start in taking action really helps us move forward. And the only things that I would probably add to Living the Change are nature-based solutions and listening to Indigenous elders. From my perspective in Australia, after this Black Summer fires, if this is where we're up to in terms of increased intensity and frequency of extreme events, then it's definitely wrong way go back. And I think we need to be humble enough as a settler community to go and listen to our elders about how they manage landscapes, water and fire, and do that around the world to include Indigenous people and their wisdom in our pathway forward. And that, I think, will really begin as a package, living the change plus working with natures and our elders, become part of a solution longer term for all of us. So thank you for that, Fletcher. I'm sure that's my time over and done with, and I'm going to give up on slides. They're really hopeless.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Philippa. And we want to transition to Q&A so that we get a chance to hear from you, our colleagues in this conversation. I'll close by inviting all of our listeners. A good way to get involved in a next leg of the journey, or to let your friends or family or colleagues know who are people of different religious or spiritual practices. If you go to sacredpeoplesacredearth.org, you'll get information about the Greenfaith International Network Day of Action on March 11th and prep towards that. So we hope you'll join in. I want to thank all of the panelists who very, very succinctly have given an awesome overview of the ways in which religious communities get engaged. And Saroja, I think we should pass to you because you're going to facilitate the Q&A with our audience, and we'd love to hear from them.
Thank you very much. What an inspiring group of speakers. There's so much territory to cover, so I'm going to go immediately to our question and answer. But first, just want to say thank you for inspiring us to really think in such a large way about our existence and what we want it to mean on this planet. We have a question from SS. How can we get younger generations to get involved with faith institutions and become a place of practicing the value of ahisma or nonviolence in the food they consume? You did start to speak about this. I'd like to come back because the intergenerational questions, Steve Chu, you started to speak about some of that work and said you might like to come back to some of that thinking. Do you have some comments on that question?
Sure, thank you so much, and thank you for the question. I think as faith institutions, we have to internally assess if we are modeling this practice that we are preaching, right? I think the younger generation is very disillusioned to a lot of structures that exist that are more bureaucratic than they are informed by our faith practices, right? So this internal practice as a faith institution, looking inwards, does that exist within our practices on how we treat those who come in with the spirit of ahimsa? If it does, then I think we'll naturally attract. Secondly, I think thinking about transformation of food systems is also transformation of people. Are we caring for the people that are really doing this work and advocating on the ground for us? Are we equipping them with the tools to address climate grief and the grief that has been induced by COVID, loss of purposefulness? Are we able to infuse through intergenerational wisdom exchange purpose of life that extends beyond capitalism? Right, because we're seeing those really fall apart at the seams. And then really, are we able to deepen the conversations beyond just, because in this moment it's only digital screens, but beyond like the webinars and the meetings, and really go into the personal connections, right? And if we're able to do that, I think we have a shot.
If you don't mind, I'd like to lean in a little bit. Have you seen examples where that exchange is happening, places where that conversation, that intergenerational conversation is happening?
Yeah, within our own organization, we're doing this deep dive of internal transformation right now as part of the work that has come from what we're seeing on the outside grow and evolve, like with the UN Biodiversity Summit that has just taken place. We're now endeavoring in an internal search amongst our own leadership and young generation to look at how we can transform to be more in alignment with the values that we're seeking for the external world to transform. Within our own local chapter here in New York, of Tzu, we just finished a 3-month-long project working with both our young high school and college students, with our senior leadership and elderly volunteers to look at the future of our organization and really bring everyone together through a design thinking process to come to consensus around what needs to happen, what has happened before and what we've learned from it, and where we need to go in the future.
Thank you so much. Such a thoughtful answer. Reverend Fletcher Harper, I would like to come to you for a moment because the statement on Sacred Earth is clearly in part about protecting the planet that is going to be passed on to a younger generation. I'm wondering how youth voices were part of the statement that was made and the movement that we're going to see.
As our Greenfaith International partners can attest, the process of creating the statement was an incredibly participatory one. And so we invited inputs from people of all generations across a diverse range of religious and spiritual communities to put the statement together. I think the other thing that's important to say is that the statement is very unequivocal. It is very bold in terms of seeing we need an absolute end to industrial agriculture. We need an end to bank financing for such activity. We need an end to government legitimization of that industry. And I think that one of the things, frankly, that religion's role is to help set some very clear moral guideposts. I mean, look, everybody knows that no religious rule gets followed 100%. But if you don't set a firm line, you don't have a prayer of getting close to it. And the statement was very unafraid to, in reflecting the commitments and the passion of younger members of religious and spiritual communities, to call a spade and to say this absolutely has to stop, and it has to stop now. That poses a challenge to political leaders. It also poses a challenge, frankly, to more conservative religious communities, which are, I think, in a way that is often unspoken in religious dialogue, a very challenging part of the problem. Fundamentalist and extremist religious groups around the world are part of the problem. If you look at Brazil, the evangelical bench controls the government and is a big part of the driving of the deforestation of the Amazon. In the United States, the conservative Christian community has a big hand in perpetuating major extractive industries. So I think that it's important for us as religious leaders, particularly those of us in the interfaith space where protection of religious minorities is so important, to be able to recognize that religion has some work to do to lead very clearly and in a principled way on this, and to sort of force that public debate, because there is a dimension of the debate that is clearly moral, and we need to have it.
Thank you very much for those comments. To all of our panelists, we are already at 9 minutes to. I'm going to extend the length of this panel by 10 to 15 minutes. If you do not have that time, of course we understand, but we would really like to make room for this conversation, and it feels like one that requires a great deal of thought and exchange. Thank you to everyone participating. This means that what was supposed to end at 9 a.m. Eastern time, 3 p.m. Central Eastern time, will now just go 15 minutes later, and we would be so thrilled if you continued to stay with us through this conversation. We're going to move to the next question. This one I'd like to direct to Philippa, Roland, and Becky O'Brien, because both of you talked a lot about the personal impact, or rather the personal action to affect change and taking responsibility. I was particularly interested in the idea that those who are not able to put their bodies in the streets or are not able to engage with policy for whatever reason are able to take personal responsibility for the political economy around them. This question is about how faith communities can put, or rather, sorry, I'm going to go to the next one down. What messages will faith communities use to call for policy or legal changes as opposed to personal dietary change and change within faith institutions? So I'm understanding Carter's question there to be about, in addition to those personal changes, and any of the panelists are welcome to participate in this question, what policy or legal challenges can we expect within this world? Please feel free to jump in, Philippa or Becky.
You want to go first? Yeah, okay, I'll jump in. I heed the question, and it's a very important one, particularly given the moment we're in right now. So the slow and gentle change is valuable, but it's not sufficient at this time. I often liken it to that childhood game of snakes and ladders. There's a lot we can do as individuals, there's even more we can do as communities, but unless we tackle the politics and the policy, it's like putting your foot on a snake and losing 10 years, and we don't have another 10 years. So all of us that are willing and able absolutely have to tackle the politics and the policies of the matter. And I think there's a need to get on the front foot and to start having that gritty optimism Christiana Figueres talks about, and show politicians that there is a pathway forward. That is an alternative that they should be taking. And that's where the value of Hazon and others are so fabulous, because it means you've got a track record and you can see entire communities shifting into a new paradigm. And I believe politicians don't lead, they follow a crowd. And I think, forgive me, Fletcher, I think Greenfaith is mounting a gentle revolution from the grassroots up, but also having very targeted, pointed language that identifies wrong way, go back. We cannot have a gas-led recovery. We cannot continue a whole lot of our practices currently. Thanks.
Thank you. Becky, I'm going to let you jump in.
Great, thank you. So a couple of things that are happening that are just specific examples. I'm reflecting on my personal synagogue is Congregation Har Hashem in Boulder, Colorado. And every year we host a symposium on spirituality in the environment. And it's an interfaith gathering to explore that intersection of faith and environmentalism. And this past year we had as one of the panelists our local representative, Joe Neguse, our federal level representative. And so bringing him in to our synagogue, sitting on our bima and talking about these issues, and both our community hearing from him, but him hearing from the Interfaith Boulder community, these issues really matter to us. And so letting them see these are top priorities for us and inviting them in. And so there are some ways we can do that. Another exciting thing that Hazon is looking at working on this coming year is resolutions and statements coming out from denominational umbrella organizations like the Union of Reform Judaism, the Rabbinical Council for Conservative Judaism, that these are the umbrella organizations representing hundreds and thousands of synagogues and millions of Jews. But in terms of traditional political advocacy, one of the things, Hazon recently went through a strategic plan, and we had a big question to ourselves, like, this is going to happen top up, bottom down, sideways, all different directions. And we were questioning ourselves as an organization. We should be more involved politically. Shouldn't we be doing more advocacy? Like, it's great that we're working with individual behavior change, institutional change, those matter. But what about legislation? And we went and we talked to 350.org. We talked to advocacy organizations, and they actually said, we need you where you are doing what you're good at and be an ally to us. And we knew that it's political advocacy, getting lobbyists in Washington, D.C., et cetera, this is serious work. And to do it well, you really need to know what you're doing. And we knew it wasn't a strength of ours. We knew, but we knew it was super important. And so it became important to us to work with other partners. And so we joined coalitions. We're in active partnership with Jewish Earth Alliance, the Jewish Climate Action Network, Dayenu. These are all Jewish advocacy organizations. And so we are in partnership with them to get out the vote, to lobby, and to have calls with legislators. And so we get our people fired up and then partner with them. And so we see it as important, but we also know that we ourselves can't do it all as an organization, but collectively we can do it all.
Thank you very much. That was probably the most fulfilling answer one could have imagined, to cover a wide spectrum of ways to be engaged. I would like to come to the next question that we have from our participants. This one is about how faith communities can help put the issue of industrial animal agriculture on the policy agenda. Reverend Barry Bear, I'm going to come to you with this. And part of what has been occurring to me over the course of this panel is just how important a role food can play in celebration and strengthening community bonds and ritual, but is now beginning to resonate as a political issue. I'm wondering if you'd like to come into this question, but I also invite any of our panelists to participate. Again, the question is, how can faith communities help put the issue of industrial animal agriculture on the policy agenda?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'd love to speak to that, because we obviously generate a tremendous amount of thought and discussion and energy through regional interfaith dialogues, through asking people to sign up to letters that are, to open letters that are then sent out to corporates and obviously to government as well. We have a huge lobby around nuclear energy. And we've had an enormous history in nuclear energy. And in fact, in 2017, we won a court case which which stopped a R1 trillion deal that was illegal, that the government was trying to push through. And we've had some tremendous success in this field, but obviously also in just generating a lot of discussion and advocacy training is one of our strengths. So we have a program called the Faith Leaders Environmental Advocacy Training Program. I've actually just come off a 3-day training with faith leaders in my area, and it's a completely intergenerational conversation. So my youngest faith leader, and we define faith leader as a person of faith who is having an impact in his community. So we had an 18-year-old young man who all he wants to do is be a good role model for his younger brothers and for people in his community. And he's really keen to learn about food security and what is the connection between gardening and actually feeding people, and how do I do this in a way that is real and meaningful and carries impact into the future and creates a better future, not only for me, but for the generations ahead of me. But at the same time, we have scientists on the same group, and we talk to them all at the same level about what are you doing? What are you teaching in your community that is going to make a difference? What is the message that you are giving? So, for instance, the biblical teachings that have been alluded to of for instance, theologies of dominion, the way we use our language is so powerful, and the messages that we bring across to our communities are really impactful in how we couch those words. So we've heard today about it's loomed large for me as the principle of ahimsa, nonviolence. And how do we bring that through our language and our understanding when we preach, when we speak to people, and in the way we role model for them? And I think that our faith leaders have such an intrinsically important role to play in this regard. So we have an enormous program, and that is our contribution.
Thank you so much. I'd like to ask if any of the other panelists, if you can raise your hand if you would also like to. Please go ahead, Reverend Fletcher Harper.
Yeah, I think that another thing, and this is something that we're in conversation within 50 by 40 on, is that in addition to pressuring governments, really looking at pressuring financial institutions is a very important piece of the picture. Greenfaith for years has been part of the fossil fuel divestment movement, which started out 7 or 8 years ago as a student-led movement. Students still play an absolutely vital role. Religious groups do also. And there's now over $11 trillion worth of investment capital around the globe that's been committed to some form of fossil fuel divestment. And that pressures financial institutions. It also creates space for political leaders, because if people make commitments with their money, it's a sign that they're ready for enabling legislation. And so within the 50 by 40's Peak Livestock Working Group, we're in conversation about what might it look like if we developed a serious strategy around pressuring finance institutions. And could we, and I think the answer is unquestionably yes, find ways for religious communities to make commitments to withdraw their investments from the major agribusiness corporations, which are responsible for massive amounts of tropical deforestation, unspeakable cruelty to animals. And how could we really build a coalition of religious support around a movement such as that as a way of bringing more pressure on legislators to make legislative change to get the systems moving as well? So I think both the legislative and financial frameworks are key to look at.
It's really fascinating what you're leaning into. We had a conversation on one of the panels yesterday where an Indigenous rights leader was speaking to us about what had happened near her reservation, how land had been sold in a very large dairy farm had moved in and there hadn't been the right consultation. And she started doing the research to find out, how did this happen? How did the exchange of land happen? And it turned out that a church was actually invested in that land project. And it wasn't entirely clear to the people who were part of that church community what they had invested in, and it wasn't clear in the land handover, but had it all unfolded into an Indigenous reserve living across from a church-funded, in part, or church rather invested dairy farm on two sides of the same street somewhere out in the countryside. So what was really interesting on social media afterwards is how many people were saying a church, and this incredible shock that we are actually talking about not just faith communities, but communities that have the power to invest and change the economic and political landscape around us. And I think that some of what you're speaking about is learning to take responsibility for that, engaging in that, not being afraid of the power within that. I would like to open this up to the rest of our panelists. Yes, please go ahead, Philippa, Roland.
Interestingly, I just organised a conversation between Religions for Peace and Faith Invest in the UK 2 nights ago. And part of that conversation I found was really interesting, because the conundrum is not just divestment of where we take things out of, but what do we put them into? So the journey is one of transition, just as it is in many areas. And I think with the dialogue around the industrial agriculture and 50 by 40, I'm an agricultural scientist, so I'll take my faith hat for 1 minute. And it's just to make sure, and it sounds like you are targeting the right 50%, because in fact, having animals as part of the system makes a nutrient cycle, so that for regenerative agriculture, permaculture, a whole lot of the more sustainable organic methods, having animals as part of the system helps, even if you don't eat them. They're there to help graze and to return nutrients to the soil. But it's so good, I think, to have that landscape picture of the map about how can we shift money from A to B to be doing good for the planet and for people. So I just want to add that into the conversation about it's not taking it out from the wrong places, but educating us all about what can we invest in that's going to be valuable. And that will help churches make decisions about what their money is doing behind their backs, because it's a whole education process for faith communities in some places to know, because they may not be having their hands on the levers for what their money is doing. So it's a whole education process, I think.
There's certainly an enormous conversation that we can hear happening in this over the last 2 days, really, but certainly within this panel. Thank you for that thought. I would like to switch to the next question on our list, which has to do more with each of you as individuals. Faith and spirituality can be a bridge between deep personal beliefs and engaging actively with the outer world constructively. What are some of your reflections and examples of this in your own lives? Steve, do you think I could begin with you?
Sure. Give me 1 second just to look at the question.
Sure.
I think in terms of looking at how our faith inspires us, I look to this idea about disconnect and imagination, right? One of my more profound discoveries over my lifetime has been how I've been conditioned by a system that does not care for me to believe that my life is in service to the system. Right. And so this notion around capitalism and excessive consumption and unchecked growth being the norm, I think is something that I was raised in. Right. And that's the environment that I was bred through. But then my faith and really learning Buddhist teachings and seeing this alternative and having that alternative be shown to me in a very visceral way has helped me create a more healthy relationship, not just with myself, but with the world around me. So my relationships with others aren't tinged with this sentiment of extractive relationships, right? It's about nourishment. It's about regeneration. It's about how we can holistically help each other. And similarly, my relationship to my food, what I consume, it's that which is really colored with that sentiment of in being in service to all sentient beings, right? Not just that this material is here to serve me as an individual, but that it has a life beyond just me. And after I am done with this material, where does it go? How does it impact others? I think is something that I've drawn deep inspiration from Buddhist teachings. And it's really colored my life to be one that is, I feel, a little healthier, a little lighter, and a little more joyful. I think if there's any takeaway I have from just this conversation overall and the overall spirit of why we should engage with faith and spiritual organizations in this fight for the transformation of food systems, it comes to this idea that we want to have healthier lives, right? And not just externally, but within our own minds and within our own being. And I think our faith and our belief patterns largely informs that. And I would love to explore having healthier ones with you all.
Could I just ask you a question? You said the words climate grief earlier on, and
Yeah.
it really stuck in my heart because you speak from a place of such inspiration and such a sense of having found your path in some way through faith and through the conversations that you're having on climate. Is that your way of overcoming that climate grief, or does it still pose a real challenge for you personally?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think climate grief is something that we're all experiencing in some shade and color. For me, I think processing grief is a key component of the human experience, right? And we've become so disconnected to our emotions as something that is valuable, I think, as this younger generation. And we're driven to pursue other things, right? The pursuit of the external rather than the transformation of the internal. And so faith and spirituality has been a core component of how I've been able to process my coming to terms with where our world is, right? And still having that hope that there is a future and there is a path forward, right? I may not be able to see it in its entirety, but I have hope in the people working in this movement. I have hope in myself and my ability to transform. I have hope in our planet and its resilience. And I have hope in this larger, grander scheme that we all fall under. And I think that has been really healthy. To be able to witness the grief and witness the suffering and say that this is true, right? But that this is not eternal, that this is not permanent, and that in this impermanent nature that we find ourselves in, that there is a way forward.
Thank you very much for those comments. I'd like to turn to the other panelists. We are now closing in on our proper closing comments. The question was, how do you bring some of the reflections and examples into your own life when looking at faith and spirituality that can be a bridge into your personal beliefs and engaging actively with the outer world? But I would encourage you to also use this as an opportunity for any closing comments. If I could come to you, Reverend Barry Bear, and offer you a chance to speak.
Thank you so much. I think one of the pivotal moments for me was during my time in seminary, and I was at an interfaith seminary, and during the Buddhism section of that particular training, going through a meditation around food, and this plate of food in front of me having this absolutely pivotal moment of realizing that this plate of food was the universe's reassurance that my continued survival was totally supported. And realizing the interconnectedness of all things and of truly of all of life. And I think that's why I'm an interfaith minister, is really I see so much the interconnectedness of all things. And I see that how we have been taught, we've been taught to buy into the myth of separation. And I believe in the healing power of interfaith. So interfaith engagement, when we start to really understand each other and to make friends with each other and start to understand how inseparable we truly are. The air that I breathe is the air that you breathe, and is the same air that is going through the plants, and we are all plants planted in the same soil. We are all kissed by the same sun and nurtured by the same rain. So for me, this is such it's a given. It's a no-brainer. We have to work together, no matter what our differences are. We're all different parts of this puzzle, and I want to use the power of interfaith engagement to bring us together, to unite for the betterment of our planet, for the good of everything. After all, this planet is our greatest point of commonality, and we have to work together to look after it. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Reverend Fletcher Harper, I'm going to turn to you now. Any closing comments?
You know, this to strike a different and I hope very complimentary tone to Steve and to Reverend Bear. From there's an Irish saying, which I love, which is this a private fight or can anybody get involved? And I think that the diversity of religious communities are recognizing more and more that we are in a struggle for the future of life. And that feels very galvanizing to me. It's a privilege to work alongside movement partners because none of us can do this alone. And I'm very grateful to be part of a larger movement that is committed to the protection of the planet and the future of life, and to do that in a just way.
Thank you so much. Philippa, Roland, I'll also give you a chance to make some closing comments.
I think I'm just going to start with Steve's comment about climate grief, because I've been working quite hard, as many of us have. And on Sunday, I thought I'd take some time off and watch TV, which I haven't done for weeks. And I sat down and turned on TV, and it was Attenborough's extinction.
Oh.
And I sat and watched Attenborough's extinction. And it really hit me quite hard because it was, you know, it is quite profound. And then there was a sort of a biopic of the reef, everybody watching the Great Barrier Reef. This year, the ABC's actually been sort of zooming live from a whole lot of parts of the Great Barrier Reef, showing the spawning this year. And so that was hopeful. But in a spiritual practice, I'm a lay Mahayana Buddhist. And there are two quotes I'd just like to share from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So one is, a mind committed to compassion is like an overflowing reservoir, a constant source of energy, determination, and kindness. And the second is, it is under the greatest adversity that there exists the greatest potential for doing good. So I find those sustaining.
Thank you so much for sharing those words. There's so many wonderful statements being made. Becky O'Brien, you have the closing words.
Thank you so much. That question is really lovely. And one of the things that came up for me is how I used to be pretty siloed. Like, I was Jewish over here and I was an environmentalist over here. And over the years, and certainly through my work with Hazon, those things came together. And that earlier question about bringing in younger generations, that's one of the things that we're finding is a lot of Jews may be Jewish way back here, like barely at all, but front and center for them is their care for the earth, their care for animals. And when they hear a Jewish space talking about those things, it is extremely attractive and exciting for them. And at the Hazon Food Conference and our Jewish food festivals around the country, we're getting people of all ages together, coming together and saying, this is the first Jewish thing I've done in years. And I'm so excited that there's a space for me and that's talking about these things that I care about. And so we're renewing not just in the environment, but Jewish life as well. And that's happened for me. Jewish is going to services on Friday night, lighting candles tomorrow night as we start Hanukkah, saying such and such prayer. Jewish is also going to my farm stand. Jewish is also looking at two products and deciding which one is better for earth and for animals and for the people who made it and brought it to me, and picking the one that's better. And so suddenly my Jewishness and my environmentalism are all here, all mixed up together. And that's been a really powerful thing. There's a teaching that I want to share, and what just kills me is it's not Jewish, but it's the best teaching ever, so I'm going to share it anyway, but then I'll close with the Jewish one. And so there is a blessed memory, an activist named Granny D, Doris Haddock, and she walked across the country in her 80s, across the United States, walked in her 80s to raise awareness around the issues that she cared about. And she said, aren't we privileged to live in at a time when everything is at stake and when our efforts make a difference in the eternal contest between the forces of light and shadow, between togetherness and division? Oh, be joyful that you are a warrior in this great time. And so there can be this sense of like guilt and overwhelm, like, oh my God, every choice matters, every year matters, or every choice matters, every year matters. Like, this is so great. And so I will close with Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he taught, our goal should be to live life in radical amazement, to look in the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. To be spiritual is to be constantly amazed. And when we are in that state, we recognize those interconnections that we've all been talking about here, and we make choices that are good for all of us here and everyone else. And so thank you for starting my day off in such a beautiful way, everybody.
Thank you, all of you, so much. I feel so incredibly lifted, and I can see from some of the comments that are being made in this Zoom chat that people are using words like inspirational and wonderful, and I think that you've given us all a lot to think about when it comes to questions of our own conscience and our morals and how we are going to take our own work forward. Thank you for also agreeing to disagree and sharing such a variety of ideas. We've managed to cover the political, the personal, the spiritual. What an amazing way to spend a little over an hour. And thank you for giving us a little bit more of your time. So appreciated. Thank you, all of you.